Imagine losing everything, yet finding family in the most unexpected place. A struggling young woman, her 10-year-old brother, and an elderly stranger bound by fate. What starts with a simple act of kindness leads to a life-changing journey. But what happens when sacrifices collide with second chances? And who's the mysterious man who holds the key to their future? Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of a small apartment in Bloomington, Indiana, casting gentle streaks of light across a cluttered kitchen counter. The smell of slightly burnt toast hung in the air as Naomi Fields hurriedly packed a lunch for her 10-year-old brother, Eli. The room was small, but every inch of it was lived in. Books stacked precariously on the dining table, a cracked photo frame hanging near the door, and a faded calendar marked with unpaid bills. "Eli, come on! You're going to be late again," Naomi called, her voice carrying the tension of someone trying to hold everything together. She glanced at the clock above the stove, its ticking growing louder with every passing second. Eli shuffled out of his room, his backpack slung over one shoulder and his hair sticking up in every direction. "Sorry, Naomi. I was finishing my math homework," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. Naomi sighed, softening as she knelt to fix his crooked collar. "I know you're working hard, buddy, but you've got to move quicker in the mornings. You don't want Mrs. Sanders scolding you again, do you?" She smiled despite her exhaustion, ruffling his hair lightly. Eli grinned back, holding out a neatly folded piece of paper. "Look, I got an A on my science test." Naomi's face lit up with genuine pride. "That's my boy. You're going places, Eli. Just don't forget who's rooting for you, okay?" Eli hugged her tightly, his voice muffled against her sweater. "You're the best sister ever." Naomi's chest tightened. She swallowed the lump in her throat, determined not to let him see the worry etched on her face. "All right, let's get you to school." On their way, Naomi marveled at Eli's boundless energy as he talked about his class project and upcoming soccer tryouts. His excitement was a balm to her fraying nerves, even as her mind raced through the day ahead. 2 months of rent overdue, electricity bill pending, groceries running low. Her fast food job at Griddle's Grill barely kept them afloat, and the weight of her student loans loomed like a dark cloud over every decision she made. As they approached the school gates, Eli waved enthusiastically before disappearing into the crowd of children. Naomi stood there for a moment, letting his joy anchor her before turning toward the bus stop. The bus ride to Griddle's Grill was as chaotic as always, filled with students, workers, and weary parents. Naomi leaned against the window, watching the city blur past. Her thoughts drifted to her parents, how they used to handle everything with such grace. Losing them in a car accident had upended her world, forcing her to become both sister and parent to Eli. "I'm doing the best I can, Mom." "Dad," she murmured under her breath, "but it never feels like enough." Griddle's Grill greeted her with the familiar hum of machinery and the sharp smell of frying oil. Naomi tied her apron quickly, dodging a glare from her manager, Mr. Dean. "You're late, Fields," he barked from the counter, arms crossed. His stern demeanor left no room for excuses. Naomi inhaled deeply, offering a quick apology. "It won't happen again, sir." "You've said that before," Mr. Dean muttered, his gaze lingering as if searching for a reason to reprimand her further. "Get to work." Naomi moved swiftly, taking orders and preparing trays with practiced efficiency. The lunch rush hadn't started yet, giving her a brief reprieve to glance outside. That's when she noticed an elderly woman sitting on the bench near the entrance. The woman, with her frail frame and weathered clothes, clutched a delicate necklace. Her lips moved in quiet murmurs, her gaze distant. Naomi felt a pang of recognition. It was the same woman she'd seen the day before, still sitting in the same spot. The rest of Naomi's shift passed in a blur. Orders piled up, customers complained, and Mr. Dean's constant presence loomed like a shadow. As she worked, snippets of conversation from customers drifted to her ears. "Have you noticed how many homeless people are around these days?" a woman at the counter said to her companion. "It's like every corner you turn, there's someone asking for change." Her friend nodded, lowering her voice. "I saw this one older lady the other day. Poor thing was just sitting there talking to herself. It's heartbreaking, but what can you do? Naomi's hands paused briefly as she overheard the exchange. Her mind flickered to the elderly woman she'd noticed outside. Was that who they were talking about? She glanced toward the restaurant's glass doors, but quickly returned her focus to her task. Her plate was already full. Getting involved in something else felt impossible right now. The evening brought heavy rain, its rhythmic patter against the restaurant's windows, creating a muted backdrop to the sounds of frying oil and clinking trays. Naomi's shift was nearing its end when the glass door creaked open, and a frail woman stepped inside, shivering from the cold. It was the same woman Naomi had seen earlier, but up close she looked even more fragile. Her thin coat was soaked through, and her trembling hands clutched a delicate necklace at her chest. She scanned the room hesitantly, her eyes filled with both confusion and quiet desperation. Naomi froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. She watched as the woman shuffled toward a corner of the restaurant, drawing a few curious glances from customers. Something about the woman's presence tugged at Naomi's heart, even as the weight of her own worries pressed heavily on her shoulders. "Fields, orders up!" Mr. Dean barked, snapping Naomi out of her thoughts. "Coming!" she replied quickly, her gaze lingering on the woman as she turned back to her station. The rain continued to fall as the frail woman lingered near the entrance of the restaurant, her soaked coat forming small puddles on the floor. Naomi couldn't keep her eyes off her as she worked, sneaking glances between orders. The woman's presence felt out of place yet profoundly significant, a living symbol of the stories Naomi had overheard earlier that day. Naomi finally spotted her moving toward the counter. Her hands trembled as she reached into her pocket, pulling out a single coin. The small clink it made as she placed it on the counter was almost drowned out by the chatter of customers and the distant hum of rain. "Excuse me," the woman's voice cracked, barely audible. "What can I get with this?" Naomi froze, her heart sinking. The coin wasn't enough to buy anything on the menu, not even a small drink. She could feel Mr. Dean's eyes on her from across the room, his gaze like a storm cloud ready to burst. I'll see what I can do," Naomi said, her voice soft and hesitant. The woman nodded faintly, her shoulders sagging in quiet defeat as if expecting to be turned away. Naomi bit her lip, torn between the fear of losing her job and the gnawing guilt of ignoring someone clearly in need. Memories of her own childhood, of empty cupboards and long nights when her parents struggled to provide, flashed in her mind. She knew that kind of hunger. It was a pain that never truly left. Naomi decided in an instant. She hurried to the kitchen, preparing a simple fried chicken meal as quickly as she could. Every motion felt weighted by the risk she was taking. She could hear Mr. Dean's voice in her head, reprimanding her, but she pushed the thought aside. When the meal was ready, she returned to the counter, careful to avoid Mr. Dean's line of sight. "Here you go, ma'am," Naomi said, her smile genuine despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "It's hot and fresh." The woman's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you sure? I only had a—" Her voice trailed off, and tears welled up in her eyes. Naomi nodded, gently pushing the tray toward her. "Don't worry about it. Just eat while it's warm." The woman clutched the tray like it was a priceless treasure. "Thank you. Thank you so much," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're an angel." As Naomi watched her settle into a corner booth, her chest tightened. The woman's gratitude was overwhelming, but so was the weight of what Naomi had just done. Her mind raced with worry. What if Mr. Dean found out? The job wasn't much, but it was all she had to keep her and Eli afloat. Her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Hey, Naomi," Eli called, his backpack slung over one shoulder as he stepped into the restaurant. His school day had ended, and he always stopped by to wait for her shift to finish. Naomi waved him over quickly, keeping her voice low. "Eli, sit over there, okay?" She motioned to a booth near the window, away from where the woman was eating. "I'll be done soon?" Eli frowned but complied, his curiosity piqued by the unusual tone in Naomi's voice. As he settled in, he noticed the elderly woman in the corner, quietly eating her meal. Something about her fragile figure and the way she clutched her necklace caught his attention. Time seemed to slow as Naomi cleaned up around the counter, sneaking glances at both Eli and the woman. She felt a small pang of relief as the woman finished her meal, offering her another quiet nod of thanks before shuffling toward the door. Rain still poured outside, and the woman hesitated, looking back as though she wanted to say something more. Naomi gave her an encouraging smile, and the woman disappeared into the night. Eli walked back to the counter, his eyes full of questions. "Naomi, who was that?" Naomi paused, unsure how to answer. "Just someone who needed a little help," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Sometimes we have to do what we can for people, even if it's just a small thing." Eli nodded, a look of admiration crossing his face. "You're the best, you know that?" Naomi chuckled, ruffling his hair. "I don't know about that, but thanks, kid." The moment of quiet was short-lived. Mr. Dean emerged from the back, his gaze immediately scanning the room. Naomi stiffened, her pulse quickening as she tried to appear busy. She knew her actions hadn't gone unnoticed, and the consequences might be just around the corner. But for now, as Eli chattered about his day and the sound of rain softened against the windows, Naomi allowed herself to breathe. She had done the right thing. At least that's what she told herself. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, the sound tapping softly against the windows of Griddle's Grill. Naomi busied herself with wiping down counters and organizing trays, trying to focus on the mundane tasks. Her mind, however, kept drifting to the elderly woman seated in the corner booth. The woman had finished her meal but remained seated, her fragile fingers tracing the edge of her necklace. Naomi couldn't help but glance at her every few moments, her heart torn between concern and worry. What would happen to her once she stepped back into the cold night? As if sensing Naomi's thoughts, the woman slowly rose from her seat, clutching her thin coat tightly around her. She made her way to the door, pausing briefly to turn back. Their eyes met, and she offered Naomi a faint, grateful smile. Naomi felt a surge of warmth despite the unease bubbling in her chest. "Thank you," the woman whispered before stepping out into the now muted rain. The door had barely closed behind her when Mr. Dean's sharp voice cut through the air. "Fields, my office. Now." Naomi froze, her heart dropping. Around her, co-workers exchanged nervous glances, but none dared to intervene. Sophie, her closest ally at work, opened her mouth as if to say something, but quickly closed it again under Mr. Dean's withering glare. With a deep breath, Naomi untied her apron and walked to the back office. She knew this wasn't going to end well. The office felt suffocating, its walls lined with stacked papers and faded posters of company policies. Mr. Dean sat behind his desk, his expression a mix of irritation and smug authority. "Do you want to explain what I just saw?" he began, his voice low and deliberate. Naomi straightened her posture. "I served a meal to someone who needed it, sir. I paid for it out of my own pocket." "You think that makes it okay?" Mr. Dean shot back, leaning forward. "Every item here is accounted for. It doesn't matter if you paid for it. Rules are rules, and you broke them." "She was hungry," Naomi said firmly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I couldn't just turn her away." Mr. Dean's lips curled into a humorless smile. "And what happens when word gets out that Griddle's Grill is a free kitchen for anyone who asks? Do you think this place stays open because of charity? You've jeopardized this business with your actions." "That's not fair," Naomi protested, her frustration spilling over. "One meal isn't going to ruin this place, and you know it." Mr. Dean slammed his hand on the desk, silencing her. "Enough. You're fired, Fields. Gather your things and leave." The words hit her like a physical blow. Naomi felt her throat tighten, but she refused to cry in front of him. "Please, Mr. Dean," she said quietly, her voice thick with desperation. "I need this job. My brother and I—" "You should have thought about that before breaking company policy," he snapped. "This isn't a discussion. You're done here." Naomi bit her lip, fighting back tears as she turned to leave. She walked past her co-workers who avoided her gaze and back to the main dining area where Eli was waiting. Eli looked up from his notebook, his face lighting up as she approached. "Naomi, are you done? Can we go home now?" She managed a weak smile, nodding as she grabbed her coat. "Yeah, let's go, buddy." Sophie caught up to her at the door, her expression apologetic. "Naomi, I'm so sorry. I tried to say something, but he wouldn't listen. It's okay, Naomi said, though her voice cracked slightly. Thanks, Sophie. I'll be fine. Sophie hesitated, then hugged Naomi quickly. You don't deserve this. If you need anything, call me. Naomi nodded, offering a small smile before stepping out into the cool night with Eli by her side. The rain had stopped, leaving the air damp and chilly. Eli held her hand as they walked, his backpack bouncing against his small frame. Naomi, are you okay? He asked, his voice soft. Yeah, she said, her tone unconvincing. I'm just tired, that's all. Did something happen at work? He pressed, his sharp eyes scanning her face. Naomi sighed, squeezing his hand. I'll tell you later, okay? Let's just get home. Eli didn't push further, but the worry etched on his face was unmistakable. Naomi felt the weight of it, a reminder of the promises she had made to keep him safe and secure. Promises that now felt harder than ever to keep. Back at their apartment, Naomi helped Eli with his homework while dinner simmered on the stove. She tried to focus on the task at hand, but her mind kept returning to the events of the day. The elderly woman's smile, Mr. Dean's anger, the sinking realization that tomorrow would bring no paycheck and no certainty. Eli finished his work and curled up on the couch with a book. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills that loomed like a mountain. The silence in the room felt oppressive, broken only by the faint rustle of Eli turning a page. You're the best sister ever, Eli said suddenly, glancing up from his book. You know that, right? Naomi blinked, startled by his words. What makes you say that? Because you always take care of me, he replied simply, his gaze steady. No matter what. Naomi's throat tightened as she fought back tears. Thanks, buddy. That means a lot. That night, as the apartment fell into a quiet stillness, Naomi stepped into the small living room and found Eli asleep at the dining table. His head rested on his open notebook, pencil still clutched in his hand. The soft glow of the desk lamp illuminated his face, peaceful in slumber despite the textbooks and school papers scattered around him. Naomi's eyes drifted to the wall above the table, where a certificate of achievement was pinned. Excellence in Science, it read, written in bold letters under Eli's name. The edges of the paper were slightly curled, but it stood out proudly among the clutter, a symbol of his hard work and potential. She gently placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, whispering, Come on, buddy, let's get you to bed. Eli stirred, mumbling something incoherent, before Naomi carefully helped him to his feet and guided him to his room. After tucking him in, she returned to the table, staring at his schoolwork and the certificate on the wall. Her chest tightened as a wave of emotion washed over her. Despite everything, despite the chaos and uncertainty they faced, Eli was thriving. He deserved more than this cramped apartment, more than her constant worrying about bills. He deserved the future he dreamed of. After tidying up Eli's books, Naomi stepped out into the cool night to take the trash down to the alley behind the building. The air smelled of rain, fresh and sharp, washing away the grime of the day. She paused for a moment, looking up at the cloudy sky as she inhaled deeply. Her moment of reprieve was interrupted by the sound of scuffling feet in a raised voice. Let go of me! The voice was faint but unmistakable, shaky and tinged with fear. Naomi's heart leapt as she turned toward the source of the commotion. At the end of the alley, under the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, she saw a familiar figure. The elderly woman from the restaurant was there, clutching her necklace as a man tried to wrest it from her hands. Hey! Naomi shouted, her voice cutting through the night. She didn't think. She just moved, running toward them with the trash bag still in her grip. She hurled it at the man, the bag bursting on impact and scattering its contents. The man cursed, startled by the unexpected attack, and stumbled backward before fleeing into the shadows. Naomi rushed to the woman's side, placing a steadying hand on her trembling shoulder. Are you okay? She asked, her voice softer now. The woman nodded shakily, clutching her necklace as if it were a lifeline. Her eyes were wide with fear but filled with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. He almost took it. Let's get you inside, Naomi said, guiding the woman back toward the apartment. The rain had started to pick up again, and the two of them moved quickly through the damp streets. Once inside, Naomi offered the woman a warm cup of tea and a blanket to wrap around her shoulders. The woman sat on the worn couch, her frail hands still gripping the necklace. Naomi sat across from her, waiting patiently until she seemed ready to speak. "This necklace," and the woman began, her voice quiet but steadying, "is all I have left of them." "Them," Naomi prompted gently. "My husband and my daughter," the woman explained, her fingers tracing the pendant. "They were on a flight years ago, a terrible accident. I wasn't with them. I was supposed to be, but I canceled last minute. I've blamed myself every day since." Naomi felt her chest tighten as the woman's words sank in. She couldn't imagine the depth of that kind of loss, but she could see the weight of it etched into the woman's face. "I'm so sorry," Naomi said sincerely. "That must have been so hard." The woman nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I lost everything that day. My family, my sense of purpose, even my mind, I think. That's why I ended up here. I wasn't strong enough to face the memories back home, so I ran. And now I don't even know who I am anymore." Naomi leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. "You're someone who matters. Don't ever forget that." The woman's lips trembled as she offered a small, sad smile. "You're very kind," she whispered. "More than I deserve." The conversation shifted as Naomi shared her own story. She talked about losing her parents, about the debts they'd left behind, and about her struggles to raise Eli while trying to keep their heads above water. She didn't sugarcoat the challenges, but she also spoke of her love for Eli and the hope she held on to because of him. "I don't know what I'm doing half the time," Naomi admitted, laughing softly, "but I know I can't give up, not when he's counting on me." The woman listened intently, her gaze softening as Naomi spoke. When Naomi finished, she reached out and placed a hand over Naomi's. "You remind me of my daughter," she said. "She had your strength, your heart. I think she would have been like you if she'd grown up." Naomi felt a lump form in her throat, but she swallowed it down, offering a small nod of thanks. Later that night, as the woman drifted off to sleep on the couch, Naomi sat at the table, staring once again at Eli's certificate. Her resolve, shaken by the events of the day, began to solidify once more. She had faced setbacks before. This was just another mountain to climb. Naomi glanced at the woman sleeping peacefully, her hands still resting protectively over her necklace. She thought about how their lives, though so different, had intersected in this moment of need. It felt like a sign, like her parents' reminder that she was doing the right thing, even when it was hard. The morning sunlight streamed through the apartment's small window, casting a warm glow over the living room where Evelyn stirred awake. She blinked a few times, adjusting to the light, and was surprised to find Naomi setting plates on the table. Eli was already up, chatting about his school projects and eagerly helping with breakfast preparations. Naomi smiled as Evelyn sat up. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine warmth. Evelyn rubbed her eyes and nodded. "Better than I have in years. Thank you. For everything." Naomi poured a cup of tea and placed it in front of her. "How about we get some fresh air today? I need to pick up groceries and a walk might do us all some good." Evelyn hesitated, looking uncertain. "I wouldn't want to be a burden." "You're not," Naomi reassured her. "Come on, it'll be fun. Eli's been dying to get out of the apartment too." Eli grinned. "I can help carry the bags and we'll get ice cream after." Evelyn chuckled at his enthusiasm. "All right then, let's go." The supermarket buzzed with life, its aisles crowded with families, college students, and elderly shoppers. Evelyn walked slowly, taking in the sights and sounds with a mix of nostalgia and curiosity. Naomi pushed the cart, while Eli darted ahead, excitedly pointing out items he thought they should buy. Evelyn paused near the produce section, her fingers grazing the bright oranges and crisp apples. "I used to make apple pies with my daughter," she said softly. "It was her favorite." Naomi stopped beside her, sensing the mix of joy and sorrow in Evelyn's voice. "Maybe we can make one together someday," she offered. "I'm not much of a baker, but Eli would love it." Evelyn smiled, her eyes glistening. "I'd like that." As they moved through the aisles, Naomi noticed a man standing near the canned goods, his sharp suit contrasting with the casual shoppers around him. He seemed distracted, scanning the shelves as if searching for something or someone. Naomi didn't give him much thought until she caught him glancing in their direction. The man was Nathan Parker, Evelyn's estranged son. He had been searching for his mother for weeks, following leads and retracing her steps. Seeing her here, walking with Naomi and Eli, stopped him in his tracks. Nathan stayed at a distance, watching as Evelyn picked up a jar of honey and handed it to Eli, who beamed as he added it to the cart. The scene struck him deeply. His mother, who had been so withdrawn and distant the last time they spoke, now looked animated and full of life. Naomi led the group to the bakery section, where Evelyn admired the freshly baked bread. Eli grabbed a loaf and handed it to her, declaring, "This one's the best." Evelyn laughed, her eyes crinkling with genuine delight. Naomi noticed the change in her, the way Evelyn seemed lighter and more present. Unbeknownst to them, Nathan followed discreetly, torn between the urge to approach and the weight of his guilt. His mother had been through so much, and he had been absent when she needed him most. Yet here she was, happy, surrounded by strangers who treated her like family. Eli stood beside her, helping place items on the conveyor belt. The cashier, an older man with kind eyes, commented on how sweet Eli was. "He must be a joy to have around," he said, and Evelyn nodded, her expression soft. "Yes, he reminds me of my grandson," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. Naomi glanced at her, surprised by the mention, but said nothing. She suspected there was much more to Evelyn's story that hadn't yet been shared. As they exited the store, Nathan stood by the parking lot, his heart pounding. He saw Evelyn laugh as Eli ran ahead, holding a bag of groceries too heavy for him to carry. Naomi called after him, her voice filled with affection, while Evelyn reached out to steady Eli before he stumbled. Nathan watched the scene unfold, the warmth and connection between the three of them stirring something he hadn't felt in years. He knew he had to act, but he wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, he made a silent promise to himself. He would find a way to make things right with his mother. That evening, back at the apartment, Evelyn and Eli helped Naomi unpack the groceries. They worked together like a well-practiced team, laughter filling the small kitchen as Evelyn recounted stories of her youth. Eli listened intently, asking questions that made Evelyn chuckle and shake her head in amusement. Naomi watched them, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and hope. Despite the challenges they faced, moments like these reminded her of what truly mattered. Family wasn't just about blood. It was about love, understanding, and the connections they chose to nurture. As Evelyn placed the last jar of honey in the cupboard, she turned to Naomi. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, "for letting me be a part of this." Naomi smiled, placing a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "You are a part of this. You belong here." In the shadows of the supermarket parking lot, Nathan sat in his car, staring at the phone in his hand. The contact screen showed his mother's name, but he couldn't bring himself to press call. Instead, he rested his head against the steering wheel, whispering to himself, "Soon." The next evening, Naomi was startled by a knock on the door. She set down the dish towel she was holding, exchanging a glance with Eli, who had been focused on his homework at the table. Evelyn, seated in the living room, tilted her head curiously. "Expecting anyone?" Naomi asked, though she already knew the answer. Eli shook his head and Evelyn didn't respond. Naomi approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. A well-dressed man stood on the other side, holding a bouquet of flowers in one hand. His stance was uncertain, as though he were debating whether to knock again. Naomi hesitated, but eventually opened the door slightly. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. The man cleared his throat, offering a nervous smile. "My name is Nathan Parker. I'm Evelyn's son." Evelyn froze at the sound of his name, her eyes widening as she clutched her necklace. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Naomi stepped aside, glancing between the two. Nathan's gaze softened as he saw his mother sitting on the couch. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly, stepping into the apartment. Evelyn remained motionless, her hands trembling as she struggled to process his presence. For a moment it seemed like she didn't recognize him, her expression clouded with confusion. But then her grip on the necklace tightened, and tears filled her eyes. "Is it really you?" Nathan nodded, his own emotions bubbling to the surface. "It's me, Mom. I've been looking for you." Naomi guided Eli into his room, giving the two space for their reunion. She lingered nearby, listening as Nathan approached Evelyn and knelt before her. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Nathan said, his voice breaking. "I should have been there for you. I didn't mean to leave you alone." Evelyn reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his face as if to confirm he was real. "You left," she murmured, her voice quivering. "After they were gone, you left me, Nathan." Nathan's shoulders slumped, guilt etched into every line of his face. "I know. I was so wrapped up in my own grief that I couldn't see how much you were hurting. I thought you'd be better off without me." Evelyn shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You were all I had left," she said, her voice a mix of anger and sadness. "All I wanted was for us to face it together." Naomi returned quietly with a cup of tea for Evelyn, setting it on the table before retreating to the kitchen. Nathan glanced at her gratefully but continued speaking to his mother. "I didn't know how to make it right," Nathan admitted. "And when I finally realized I needed to, you were gone. I've been looking for you ever since." Evelyn looked down at her hands, her thumb running over the pendant of her necklace. "I didn't think you cared anymore," she said softly. "That's why I left. The memories, they were too much." Nathan turned to Naomi, his expression pleading. "Thank you for taking care of her. I don't even know how to repay you for what you've done." Naomi shook her head. "You don't need to repay me. Evelyn's been a blessing to us too. She's brought something into our lives that we didn't know we needed." Nathan smiled faintly, his gaze returning to his mother. "She's always been good at that." Later, as the conversation shifted, Evelyn began sharing pieces of her story that Naomi hadn't heard before. She spoke about her husband, Robert, and their daughter Grace, the vibrant, curious girl who had loved baking and dreamt of traveling the world. Evelyn described the day they boarded the flight, how a last-minute change had kept her grounded, and the devastating phone call that shattered her life. Nathan added his perspective, revealing how the loss had driven them apart. "I blame myself for not being there, for not protecting them," he confessed. "But instead of being strong for you, I ran. I've been running ever since." Evelyn placed a hand over his, her fingers still trembling, but steady enough to convey her forgiveness. "We've both been running, Nathan. Maybe it's time we stop." Naomi felt a lump in her throat as she listened from the kitchen. The raw honesty and emotion in their words struck a chord deep within her. She thought of her own parents, of the life they'd worked so hard to build for her and Eli before it was taken away too soon. It reminded her of why she fought so hard every day, because family was worth fighting for. Eli wandered into the room, rubbing his eyes sleepily. He glanced between Evelyn and Nathan, his curiosity evident. "Who's he?" Eli whispered to Naomi. Naomi smiled gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's Evelyn's son. He's family." As the night wore on, the tension in the room began to ease. Evelyn and Nathan exchanged smiles and laughter between tears, their shared memories bridging the gap that had grown between them. Naomi watched quietly, feeling a sense of hope bloom in the small apartment. Before leaving, Nathan turned to Evelyn. "I want to make things right, Mom. I'd like you to come live with me." Evelyn hesitated, her hand clutching her necklace. I don't know, Nathan. I feel safe here. Naomi and Eli, they've been so good to me." Nathan nodded, respecting her hesitation. "Then I'll visit, as often as you want. We'll take this one step at a time." Evelyn smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Thank you, Nathan. That means a lot." After Nathan left, Naomi sat with Evelyn, the two women reflecting on the evening. "Are you okay?" Naomi asked softly. Evelyn nodded, her fingers tracing the pendant of her necklace. "I think I am. For the first time in a long time, I feel okay." Naomi smiled, squeezing her hand. "You deserve it, Evelyn. You deserve to feel whole again." The morning after Nathan's visit was quieter than usual. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea as she stared at the rain drizzling outside. Naomi moved about the apartment, preparing breakfast and stealing glances at Evelyn's thoughtful expression. Eli, oblivious to the weight of the previous night's conversation, hummed to himself while packing his school bag. As Naomi set a plate of eggs and toast in front of Evelyn, the older woman finally broke her silence. "Nathan really meant it, didn't he?" she said softly, her voice tinged with both hope and apprehension. Naomi nodded, taking a seat across from her. "He did. I think he really wants to make things right." Evelyn's fingers brushed against the necklace she always wore. "I've been running from my memories for so long. Maybe, maybe it's time I stop." Naomi reached out and placed a reassuring hand over Evelyn's. "Whatever you decide, we're here for you." Later that afternoon, Naomi was surprised when Nathan knocked on the door again, holding a folder and wearing a determined expression. She invited him in, and they sat at the small dining table while Evelyn rested in the living room. "I've been thinking," Nathan began, glancing at the folder in his hands. "My mom seems happy here, and I don't want to disrupt that. But I also want to make sure she's cared for properly. That's why I'd like to propose something." Naomi raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "Go on." "I run a company," Nathan explained. "We have flexible roles, and I'd like to offer you a position. But more importantly, I'd like to hire you temporarily as my mother's caregiver. You've already built a connection with her, and it's clear she trusts you." Naomi's eyes widened. "Caregiver? Nathan, I don't have any formal training for that." "You don't need it," Nathan said quickly. "You've done more for her in the short time you've known her than any professional could. This is just formalizing what you're already doing." Naomi hesitated, glancing toward Evelyn, who was dozing peacefully on the couch. The idea of a steady income was tempting, especially after losing her job at Griddle's Grill. But the weight of responsibility felt daunting. "I'd have to balance that with taking care of Eli," she said thoughtfully, "and I still need to find something long-term." Nathan nodded. "I understand. The job I'm offering at my company can be done remotely. It's flexible enough to give you time with Eli and my mom." That evening, Naomi discussed the offer with Eli. He listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. "Does this mean we get to keep Evelyn here with us?" he asked. "For now," Naomi replied, "but it also means I'll need your help around the apartment. Think you can handle that?" Eli grinned. "I can handle anything." His confidence bolstered Naomi's resolve. She accepted Nathan's offer the next day, and the arrangement began immediately. The first week was a learning curve. Evelyn's moods fluctuated, with moments of clarity followed by bouts of confusion. Naomi adapted quickly, finding ways to soothe Evelyn during difficult moments and celebrate small victories, like when Evelyn remembered the words to an old lullaby she used to sing to her daughter. Eli became an unexpected source of joy for Evelyn. He would sit beside her with his homework, asking her questions about history and science that often led to her sharing stories from her own childhood. One evening, he pulled out a notebook and declared that they should write a book together. The Adventures of Grandma Evelyn and Eli. Evelyn laughed, her face lighting up in a way Naomi hadn't seen before. "That sounds like a bestseller," she said, ruffling his hair. Nathan visited frequently, bringing supplies and checking in on Evelyn's progress. Each time he arrived, he seemed more at ease, his guilt slowly giving way to gratitude. He often stayed for dinner, sharing stories about his work and listening to Eli's animated retellings of his school day. One evening, as they sat around the table, Nathan turned to Naomi. "I've been meaning to ask, what's your plan moving forward? Do you see yourself doing this long-term?" Naomi paused, considering the question. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "I never planned for any of this. But I know one thing. I'm not giving up. For Eli, for Evelyn, for myself. I'll figure it out." Nathan nodded, a look of respect crossing his face. "You're stronger than you realize, Naomi." As the days turned into weeks, the apartment began to feel less like a temporary arrangement and more like a home. Evelyn started contributing in small but meaningful ways, folding laundry, setting the table, and even teaching Eli how to sew a button back onto his shirt. One evening, Evelyn surprised Naomi with a small gift, a framed photo of the three of them from their first outing together. "I wanted to thank you," Evelyn said, her voice trembling, "for giving me a family again." Naomi blinked back tears, accepting the frame with a smile. "You've done the same for us." The morning sun poured into the apartment, lighting up the small kitchen as Naomi prepared breakfast. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the soft crackle of bacon on the stove. Eli bounded into the room, his hair still messy from sleep. Evelyn followed a moment later, her steps slower but steady, her face bright with a smile. "Morning," Eli chirped, pulling up a chair. "What's the plan for today?" Naomi glanced at Evelyn, who seemed unusually chipper. "I thought we'd spend the day together," Naomi said, looking between them. "Maybe go to the park, have a picnic. What do you think?" Evelyn's eyes lit up. "A picnic? I haven't done that in years. My husband and I used to take Grace to the park every Sunday. She loved feeding the ducks." Naomi smiled warmly. "Then it's settled. Let's make some memories." Eli jumped at the chance to help. He darted around the kitchen, grabbing containers and plastic utensils, while Naomi packed sandwiches and snacks. Evelyn guided him through a simple lemonade recipe, sharing stories about how her daughter used to add mint leaves for an extra touch. By the time they were ready, the three of them had put together a picnic basket filled with sandwiches, fruit, cookies, and Evelyn's freshly made lemonade. Eli insisted on carrying the basket, puffing out his chest with exaggerated pride as they left the apartment. The park was alive with families, joggers, and couples enjoying the warm day. Naomi found a shaded spot under a large oak tree, spreading out a blanket while Eli ran off to explore. Evelyn settled onto the blanket with a contented sigh, her gaze drifting over the open green space. "This is lovely," she said, her voice soft. "It reminds me of the park near our old house. Grace used to bring her sketchbook and draw everything she saw." "Did she like art?" Naomi asked, arranging the food. "Oh, she loved it," Evelyn said with a wistful smile. "She wanted to study art history. She had this dream of traveling to Europe, visiting all the great museums." Naomi listened intently, sensing the mixture of joy and sorrow in Evelyn's voice. She reached out and gently squeezed Evelyn's hand. "She sounds like she was amazing." Evelyn nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "She was." Eli returned, his arms full of wildflowers he'd picked along the way. "For you," he announced, presenting the flowers to Evelyn with a dramatic bow. Evelyn laughed, her face lighting up as she accepted the bouquet. "Why, thank you, kind sir. These are beautiful." Naomi chuckled, watching the exchange. "All right, you two, let's eat before Eli decides to adopt the ducks." They dug into the picnic, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the park. Evelyn shared more stories from her past, each one painting a vivid picture of the life she'd once had. Naomi found herself drawn into these tales, her own worries momentarily forgotten. After lunch, Eli begged Evelyn to walk with him to the pond. Naomi watched as they strolled away, Eli chattering excitedly while Evelyn listened with a patient smile. She noticed how easily they connected, the generational gap bridged by shared curiosity and kindness. As they returned, Eli held Evelyn's hand to steady her, his small gesture bringing a lump to Naomi's throat. She thought about how much Evelyn had changed since coming into their lives, how the frail, quiet woman from the restaurant had become someone so full of warmth and life. The afternoon passed in a blur of simple joys. Naomi and Evelyn sat together under the tree, watching Eli fly a kite with a group of children he'd befriended. Evelyn's laughter rang out as the kite dipped and soared, her face glowing with a happiness that seemed to erase years from her features. "Thank you for this," Evelyn said suddenly, turning to Naomi. "For everything. You've given me more than I could have ever hoped for." Naomi shook her head. "You've given just as much back, Evelyn. You've brought something into our lives that we didn't even know we were missing." Evelyn smiled, her hand resting over her heart. "I feel like I'm part of a family again." As the sun began to set, casting the park in hues of orange and gold, they packed up and headed home. Eli skipped ahead, his wildflowers still tucked in Evelyn's bag. Naomi and Evelyn walked side by side, their steps in sync as they talked about the day. Back at the apartment, the atmosphere was cozy and relaxed. Evelyn helped Naomi wash the dishes, humming a soft tune as they worked. Eli sat at the table, scribbling in his notebook about their adventure, his face still glowing with excitement. Later that evening, Naomi tucked Eli into bed, listening as he recounted every detail of the day. "I think Evelyn is the coolest grandma ever," he declared, his voice sleepy but full of conviction. Naomi smiled, brushing his hair back. She is, isn't she? As Eli drifted off, Naomi returned to the living room, where Evelyn sat with a photo album in her lap. She was carefully arranging pictures they'd taken throughout the day, her movements slow and deliberate. I want to remember this, Evelyn said, glancing up at Naomi. Days like today, they're what life is about. Naomi sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. We'll have plenty more, Evelyn, I promise. That night, Naomi stood by the window, gazing out at the city lights. She held the locket Evelyn had given her, the familiar weight of it a reminder of everything they'd been through together. For the first time in a long time, Naomi felt a deep sense of peace. The struggles weren't over, far from it, but today had shown her what they were fighting for. Family wasn't just about blood, it was about love, connection, and the moments that made life worth living. The morning light filtered through the windows as Naomi poured coffee into 2 mugs, the familiar routine grounding her. Evelyn was already awake, sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around the locket Nathan had given her years ago. She turned it over in her fingers, her expression a mixture of peace and thoughtfulness. Naomi placed a steaming cup in front of her. You've been holding on to that a lot lately, she said gently. What's on your mind? Evelyn smiled faintly. Nathan. I see so much of his father in him. I was so angry with him for leaving, but now I realize I've been holding on to that anger because it was easier than facing my own guilt. Naomi sat across from her, listening intently. You don't have to carry it alone anymore, Evelyn. He wants to make things right, and so do you. Evelyn nodded, her resolve firming. You're right, it's time to let go. Later that day, Nathan arrived at the apartment with a bag of groceries and a determined look. Evelyn greeted him warmly, and Naomi noticed how much more at ease they both seemed. Over dinner, Nathan shared news of a small family event at his office, a chance for employees to bring loved ones and reconnect. I'd love for you to come, Mom, Nathan said, his tone hopeful. It's nothing big, just a few co-workers and their families. But I think it'd be a good step for both of us. Evelyn hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of her plate. Naomi placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It could be a nice way to spend time together, she said softly. Evelyn looked up, her eyes meeting Nathan's. All right, I'll go. The event was held in a bright, airy space on the top floor of Nathan's office building. Evelyn clung to Naomi's arm as they entered, her eyes wide as she took in the polished floors and bustling crowd. Nathan stayed close, guiding them to a quieter corner where they could sit and talk. One of Nathan's co-workers, a cheerful woman named Marissa, approached with her young daughter. You must be Evelyn, she said warmly. Nathan's talked so much about you. Evelyn smiled shyly. He has. Of course, Marissa said. He's so proud of you. Evelyn glanced at Nathan, her eyes softening. I didn't know that. Nathan smiled. There's a lot I haven't said, Mom, but I'm proud of you every day, for everything you've been through and the strength you've shown. Evelyn's lips trembled, but she held back her tears, nodding silently as she took his hand in hers. Meanwhile, Naomi wandered to the refreshment table, keeping an eye on Evelyn from a distance. A familiar voice called her name, and she turned to see Sophie, her former co-worker from Griddle's Grill. Sophie? Naomi said, surprised. What are you doing here? I work here now, Sophie explained, grinning. Best decision I ever made. After you left, a bunch of us started standing up to Mr. Dean. He couldn't take the pressure, and corporate replaced him. Naomi raised her eyebrows. Really? Sophie nodded. It was your courage that started it. You showed us it was okay to do the right thing, even when it's hard. And now I'm in a much better place because of it. Naomi felt a surge of pride and gratitude. I'm glad, she said sincerely. You deserve it. So do you, Sophie said. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Back at the table, Evelyn was beginning to relax, her laughter mingling with the hum of conversation around them. Eli, who had tagged along, charmed Nathan's co-workers with his quick wit and boundless energy. He proudly told them about the book he was writing with Evelyn, drawing smiles and encouragement from everyone. Nathan watched the scene unfold, his heart swelling with gratitude. For years, he had carried the weight of regret, believing he had lost his chance to rebuild his family. But here, in this room, he saw the threads of connection mending before his eyes. As the event wound down, Nathan stood with Evelyn by the large windows overlooking the city. The twinkling lights mirrored the quiet peace on their faces. "Thank you for coming, Mom," Nathan said, his voice low. "It means more to me than I can say." Evelyn reached out and took his hand. "Thank you for not giving up on me. I didn't realize how much I needed this, how much I needed you." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Nathan spoke again. "How about we start having dinner together once a week? No pressure, just family time." Evelyn smiled, her grip on his hand tightening. "I'd like that." That night, back at the apartment, Evelyn seemed lighter, her steps more purposeful. She sat with Eli and Naomi, flipping through photos from the event that Nathan had printed for them. Each image told a story of connection, forgiveness, and the beauty of second chances. Naomi watched them with a smile, her heart full. The road ahead was still uncertain, but moments like these reminded her of the power of love and resilience. They weren't just surviving, they were rebuilding, together. The apartment hummed with quiet energy as Naomi pored over her laptop, scrolling through emails from Nathan about her new position. She had spent weeks balancing her work as Evelyn's caregiver and assisting remotely at Nathan's company. It was challenging, but Naomi felt invigorated by the steady rhythm and sense of purpose. Eli, sitting across the table, worked on a colorful poster for his school project. Evelyn sat beside him, guiding his hand as he carefully outlined a drawing of their family. The connection between them warmed Naomi's heart. They had grown into a cohesive unit, each supporting the other in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Later that morning, Nathan arrived, bringing a sense of occasion with him. He carried a folder tucked under his arm and a smile that hinted at something significant. "I have news," he said, stepping into the apartment. Evelyn greeted him warmly, and Naomi quickly ushered him to the dining table, where Eli proudly showed off his project. "Looks great, buddy," Nathan said, ruffling Eli's hair. "You've got talent." Eli beamed, and Nathan turned to Naomi, placing the folder in front of her. "I've been thinking about everything you've done for my mom, for Eli, and for me. I wanted to make sure you all have the stability you deserve." Naomi opened the folder, her eyes widening as she scanned the papers inside. "A lease agreement?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "For a new apartment," Nathan explained. "A bigger place, closer to good schools for Eli. Fully furnished, everything taken care of. It's the least I can do after everything you've given us." Naomi's breath caught, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Nathan, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Evelyn chimed in, her smile reaching her eyes. "You've earned this, Naomi." Naomi's throat tightened as she looked at Eli, who was practically bouncing with excitement. "We'll be able to decorate my room, right?" he asked eagerly. She nodded, tears threatening to spill. "Yes, buddy, we'll make it your dream room." Moving day arrived quickly, bringing a mix of emotions. The new apartment was spacious, bright, and filled with possibilities. Eli darted from room to room, planning where to put his books and posters, while Naomi marveled at the kitchen's modern amenities. Evelyn lingered near the large living room window, gazing out at the city skyline. "It's beautiful," Evelyn said softly. This feels like home." Naomi joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It is home. For all of us." The first evening in their new apartment felt like a celebration. They ordered takeout, laughing as Eli struggled to use chopsticks. Evelyn shared stories about her favorite family meals, and Nathan joined them later, bringing dessert and a sense of camaraderie that felt natural and earned. Evelyn's progress had been remarkable. Her moments of confusion were less frequent, and she seemed more present and engaged. She had even started suggesting outings and activities, something Naomi noted with quiet pride. "I feel like I'm living again," Evelyn said that night, as they all sat together in the cozy living room. "Thank you for giving me this second chance." The next day, Naomi visited Nathan's office for an in-person orientation. The sleek, modern building was a far cry from the greasy kitchen of Griddle's Grill. Nathan introduced her to her new team, a group of supportive and welcoming colleagues who made her feel at ease immediately. During the team meeting, Nathan took a moment to address the room. I want to introduce someone very special, he said, gesturing toward Naomi. She's not just a talented professional, she's someone who embodies resilience, kindness, and strength. We're lucky to have her. Naomi felt her cheeks flush as the room erupted in applause. It was the first time in a long time that she felt truly seen and appreciated. Back at the apartment, Eli was thriving in his new school. Nathan had gone above and beyond to ensure he was enrolled in a top-tier educational program, covering tuition and expenses. Eli's excitement was contagious as he shared stories about his new teachers and friends. Evelyn became his biggest cheerleader, helping him with homework and encouraging him to pursue his dreams. One evening, as they worked on a science project together, Eli looked up at Naomi and said, "I'm going to be a teacher someday, just like you teach me." Naomi's heart swelled. "You're going to be amazing, Eli. I know it." As the weeks passed, their new life settled into a steady rhythm. Naomi continued to grow in her role at Nathan's company, finding confidence in her abilities. Evelyn, now fully integrated into their family, took on the role of a grandmother figure for Eli, offering wisdom and warmth that he soaked up eagerly. One quiet evening, Evelyn surprised Naomi with a heartfelt gesture. She handed her a small box, inside of which was her cherished locket. "I want you to have this," Evelyn said, her voice steady but emotional. "It's been a symbol of everything I've lost, but now it feels like a symbol of what I've gained. You've given me a family again." Naomi held the locket tightly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you, Evelyn. I'll cherish it." That night, as the city lights twinkled outside their window, the three of them sat together on the couch, flipping through a scrapbook Evelyn had started. It was filled with photos from their journey, picnics, dinners, quiet nights at home. Each image told a story of resilience, love, and the beauty of second chances. As Eli drifted off to sleep on the couch, Evelyn leaned her head against Naomi's shoulder. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said softly. Naomi nodded, her heart full. "We have, and I think the best is yet to come." The morning light filtered into the spacious new apartment, its warm glow reflecting off freshly painted walls and polished wood floors. Eli darted around the living room, excitedly arranging his new bookshelf while Naomi carefully hung a family photo on the wall. Evelyn sat on the couch, watching them with a serene smile, her hands resting on the locket that Naomi now wore around her neck. "This place feels magical," Eli declared, holding up a book triumphantly. "It's like a castle," Naomi chuckled, adjusting the frame on the wall. "It's a start, buddy, but we'll make it even better." Evelyn nodded, her gaze sweeping across the room. This feels like a fresh chapter for all of us." The first weekend in their new home became an impromptu celebration. Nathan arrived with groceries and a box of board games, insisting on cooking dinner for everyone. Naomi gave him a skeptical look but handed him the apron, laughing as he fumbled with the spice rack. Eli watched in fascination as Nathan tried to flip a pancake, only to have it land halfway out of the pan. "I think we'll stick to scrambled eggs next time," Nathan said, sheepishly scraping the mess into the sink. "Hey, at least you tried," Naomi teased, her laughter filling the kitchen. Evelyn chimed in, "You get points for effort, Nathan, but maybe let Naomi take over before you set off the smoke alarm." They sat down to a simple meal of pasta and salad, the air filled with warmth and laughter. Eli insisted on leading a game of charades afterward, his dramatic reenactments of superheroes and historical figures leaving everyone in stitches. The following week brought new opportunities for growth. Naomi thrived in her role at Nathan's company, balancing her workload with ease thanks to the flexibility he had built into her schedule. Her colleagues began seeking her input on projects, impressed by her innovative ideas and problem-solving skills. One afternoon, Nathan called her into his office, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Naomi," he began, gesturing for her to sit, "I've been reviewing your work, and I think it's time to expand your responsibilities." Naomi's eyes widened. "You mean a promotion?" Nathan nodded, sliding a folder across the desk. "You've earned it. This comes with a pay increase and more opportunities for leadership. I think you're ready." Naomi stared at the folder, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "Thank you, Nathan. I won't let you down." I know you won't, he said, smiling warmly. You've been an inspiration, not just to me, but to everyone here. Back at home, Evelyn found her own ways to contribute to their new life. She took up gardening, transforming the small balcony into a lush space filled with potted herbs and colorful flowers. Eli became her eager assistant, learning the names of plants and the basics of cultivation. One evening, Evelyn surprised them with a simple but heartfelt gesture. She had baked an apple pie from scratch, using a recipe she used to make with her daughter. As they sat around the table, savoring the dessert, Evelyn's eyes glistened with emotion. This pie, it was always Grace's favorite, she said softly, and now it feels like I'm sharing a piece of her with you. Naomi placed a comforting hand over hers. Thank you for sharing this with us, Evelyn. It means so much. Eli continued to excel in his new school, thanks in part to Nathan's generous sponsorship of his education. One evening, he burst through the door holding a certificate, his face glowing with excitement. Look, Naomi, I got first place in the science fair, he exclaimed, waving the paper in the air. Naomi enveloped him in a tight hug. I'm so proud of you, Eli. You're amazing. Evelyn chimed in, her voice full of pride. I knew you had it in you, sweetheart. Keep aiming high. Eli beamed, holding the certificate like a trophy. I couldn't have done it without you guys. As the days turned into weeks, their new home became a haven of stability and love. Evelyn's mental health continued to improve, her moments of confusion growing fewer and farther between. She began reaching out to old friends, reconnecting with pieces of her past that had once seemed too painful to face. One afternoon, Nathan stopped by with news. I've been thinking, he began, sitting across from Naomi at the kitchen table, about how far we've all come, and I want to make sure this family has everything it needs to keep growing. He handed her an envelope and Naomi opened it to find a deed for the apartment. Nathan, what is this? She asked, her voice trembling. This place is yours, he said simply. No strings attached. Consider it my way of saying thank you for everything you've done for my mom, for Eli, and for me. Tears welled up in Naomi's eyes as she looked at him, unable to find the words. Evelyn reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. You deserve this, Naomi. You've given us a home in every sense of the word. That evening, they gathered in the living room for a quiet celebration. Nathan brought a bottle of sparkling cider, and Eli insisted on making a toast. To family, Eli said, raising his glass. To new beginnings and being awesome together. They all laughed, clinking their glasses. Naomi looked around the room, her heart full as she took in the faces of the people who had become her family. As the night wore on, they sat together on the couch, flipping through a photo album Evelyn had been working on. Each page was filled with snapshots of their journey, from the humble beginnings at the old apartment to the milestones they had achieved in their new home. This is just the beginning, Naomi said softly, her gaze lingering on a photo of Eli and Evelyn planting flowers on the balcony. There's so much more ahead. Evelyn nodded, her hand resting over her locket. We've come so far, and I think we're exactly where we're meant to be. Naomi smiled, leaning back as Eli nestled between them. The city lights twinkled outside, casting a soft glow over their home. For the first time in years, Naomi felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And there you have it, a story of resilience, kindness, and the unbreakable bonds that can form even in the darkest times. Naomi's journey shows us that every act of compassion, no matter how small, has the power to ripple outwards and transform lives. Evelyn's redemption reminds us that it's never too late to heal, to forgive, and to start again. And Nathan, he proves that stepping up for family can mend even the deepest wounds. What about you? Have you ever experienced a moment when kindness changed your perspective or your life? Or do you believe that acts of kindness, like Naomi's, always come back to you in unexpected ways? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your experiences, your views, or just how this story made you feel. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring tales like this one. Remember, the best stories are the ones we create together. See you next time.